Morning, we've been asking you to participate in our question for today on the agenda, where we were saying that we have a conversation on land and asked you to send your contributions at the agenda _SABC. Now, just to deviate a little bit, a short while ago, speaking at the BRICS breakfast, President Cyril Ramaphosa reiterated that government is not planning to grab land under the Ingonyama Trust. He says that there's no need to declare war. He says he will be meeting with the King of Amazulu, King Goodwill Zwelithini. Also on the land issue, yesterday the EFF and Contralesa addressed a media briefing. Julius Malema says the Imbizo held this week should be seen as part of the debate on land. It's a contribution to that debate. He also said that the King's comments were nothing compared to what white people said during the public hearings. Now, in our studio to talk to us about this conversation is the co-chair of the Parliamentary Hearings Committee from Parliament, Mr. Vincent Smith. Mr. Smith, thank you so much for making the time. Fatigue must be setting in. It's been quite a long 2 weeks.
It has been a long 2 weeks, and thanks for having me on this set.
Now, when the process began, you were so enthused by the overwhelming response from the public and looking forward to the participation. With hindsight and this initial beginning phase, we know you haven't been to all of the provinces. What's your take?
There's three things that jump out at me, Desiree. The first one is, I think we underestimated the interest that South Africans will show. When we were planning 350 people per event. We've had 300% more than that in all the events. So one, I think people are very interested in it. The second thing that jumps out at us was the quality of the arguments that people used. It was not just I don't agree or I agree. They gave reasons why they agree and reasons why they don't agree to the amendment of Section 25.
Yeah.
So the quality was very, very impressive. And the third thing, I think, for me was the tolerance that South Africans have of each other. There was a bit of howling. When we asked people to settle down, they settled down and were acceptant of divergent views. So those are the three things for me that gives me hope that this is the correct thing to do.
Let's just try and unpack Section 25. And the bone of contention there is whether people will be compensated or not compensated for their land. In terms of this section of the Constitution and the interactions, were you able to get a sense of which section of the community was against the scrapping of the section, or which section was encouraged to change this section of the Constitution? You
know, I think the section that was most against it were those that I think are current property owners, who felt that to amend it and to allow for expropriation without compensation would create chaos in the market, would bring uncertainty to potential investors, and it is just anxiety for those that have invested all their life in the land. And on the other side, those that are keen and are unapologetic about expropriation without compensation are the people who have been deprived up to now. The farm workers, the laborers, the people that live in informal settlements. Those are the people who are saying expropriate without compensation because this land was taken without those that took the land having paid anything for it. So why should government pay for getting the land back? Those were the kinds of arguments we received, and we will process all of them.
Some of the conversations we had here on the show were from the Kwe and the San people, who were worried that whatever progress was made in this conversation, they were always outside of the circle. They were not included. In terms of the work of Parliament, what is being done to bring the Kwe and the San people into the fold?
Well, I'm not sure that they were excluded. The very first hearings that Parliament had was in Springbok. And I thought that was the heartland of where the Khoi and the San are.
Their contention was the time frames, and how if the time frames are not changed, they remain outside of the conversation.
We've been given a deadline by Parliament of the 28th of September, and we've tried our best to work within those deadlines of the 28th of September. But we had also opened up for written submissions. There are more than 700,000 written submissions where people could have even given it to us in writing. So it was not just about seeing us face to face, but it was also written submissions. And we're hoping that between these two exercises of outreach, most people would have had an opportunity to have their say.
The question of the high-level panel invariably got into the conversation. And one thinks there's always a need to separate that operation with the Parliamentary Constitutional Review Committee. Can you help us with the viewers to separate these two activities and the panels?
Yes, our exercise was to go and ask South Africans to answer the question whether Section 25 should be amended, and if so, how, to allow the state to expropriate without compensation. So ours was to listen to all South Africans. My view is that the input from the high-level panel is but one input that we will consider when we look at the recommendations that we send to Parliament. So we have not taken it as something special or extraordinary, but it will be part of the debate, and it will be incorporated when we do our final recommendation. So that was an exercise that Parliament had asked for on its own. Ours was a totally different one, and ours in the main is to ask South Africans to comment.
Having seen the divergent views coming in from all the areas that you went to, where will the work of that panel start to flow into your work?
It will flow into our work when we get back to Cape Town round about the end of August, because then we will consider the 700,000 written submissions that are waiting for us in Cape Town. We will consider the submissions that we've received over the past 6 weeks by the time we get back, and we will consider the input that has been sourced from the high-level panel and from the symposium that we had before we left, where all academics were asked to be part of it. So all those will be put into a pot, and we'll come up with a recommendation that hopefully we'll be able to defend when we go to Parliament.
Our viewers are also extremely interested in this conversation, and we ask them to contribute, and we're going to look at a question from one of the viewers right now, if we can bring that up and see what it is.
How does the government plan to deal with the issue of our people erecting shacks everywhere instead of using the land, the space they have been afforded, or the one which they expropriate for building farms, warehouses, and where there's areas of farming, use that land for farming?
It speaks to something the President has spoken about as well, with deciding whether to use the land for residential purposes or productive purposes, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. My view, and I don't want to talk on behalf of the ANC, but our view is been that land that is expropriated will not only be for agricultural purposes. I mean, I know that in Gauteng, they're considering expropriating idle land for residential purposes so that we can disrupt the apartheid spatial design that was there. So yes, I would assume that once they've identified idle land, people will then be moved there for residential purposes, and I would imagine that will address some of the log jams that we have in the informal settlements, certainly in Gauteng. I think that's the intention, and I would imagine that would be the intention across the country, that it's not only for agriculture, but it's also for residential.
You spoke at the beginning of the conversation about the oversubscription, and that was unexpected. Does it impact on the timeframes of the committee and your work, and how you can make sure you are thorough enough in terms of your responses?
No, it doesn't impact on the timeframes. What it does do, I think, is it enriches the discussions that Parliament will have when we get back. And also it will probably assist us in writing a report that would be all-inclusive. So it's not going to, we don't have the luxury of extending the time frames. In fact, South Africans have said to us, don't come and talk to us and don't act. We want you to act as soon as possible. We've made an undertaking that by the 28th of September, this committee will make its recommendation to Parliament, and Parliament will decide how to take it forward.
Now, political parties have also come into the fray. The EFF yesterday, the IFP, the ANC responding this morning. They have a platform in Parliament in terms of how they can contribute to this conversation. How do you separate the political and the socio-economic, or the community, the population, general population that is not necessarily members of political parties?
We've asked everybody to, one, mobilize their stakeholders or supporters. And two, we've also opened the door for any South African to come and talk to us. So political parties don't have an extra or a special or a heightened vote. Every word or every input will be treated equally. So political parties can mobilize. Civil society like Agri-Forum and race relations, everybody can mobilize. Let me just take this opportunity, Desiree, to indicate that this is not a referendum. You could come with 1,000 arguments that are saying the same thing. It's not going to have more weight than one individual coming with an argument. So it really doesn't matter how much you mobilize. It's the strength of the argument that will determine our recommendations.
What determines the strength of the argument?
Well, like I said, people are saying, but we don't have land to bury our people, as an example. Others are saying, if you go the route of expropriation, investors will be reluctant to come and invest in our country. Those are arguments that we must consider, bearing in mind that we're saying food security must not be tampered with, agricultural productivity must not be tampered with, security of tenure must not be tampered with. So those will be the things that will inform us whether these principles are being tampered with. So you could come with your argument 100 times, it's not going to add more weight.
Well, we welcome your contribution on our line 0817328421, and I think right now we have a voice note from Xolile Spielman, if I'm not wrong. Let's listen in on that one.
Why so difficult to take the land from white people? Because the land was never negotiated. It was taken by the barrel of the gun. Now why this thing of going, making a lot of public submission is not covered from our side?
That smirk on your face, is that because you've heard this argument a lot of times?
No, we have heard it a lot of times, and I can appreciate the people raising that argument. But remember, after 1994, we became a constitutional democracy.
Yep.
And whatever we do, we have to do it within the confines of the Constitution. Because if we don't, it will be challenged in a constitutional court, and this whole exercise will
be for
be nothing. So I understand people's anxiety, I understand people's impatience, but we're not going to do anything outside of the Constitution. Two wrongs don't make a right.
You speak about a constitutional democracy, and one of the things that has emerged out of this conversation is the Ingonyama Trust and its legality and the fact that it's based in law. Let's talk about Ingonyama Trust and perhaps some of the other laws that we're not necessarily focusing on that have an impact of how this all plays out.
Look, I'm not going to talk on the Ingonyama Trust other than to say that the trustees of Ingonyama Trust are, like everybody else, welcome to make their own input. We are going to KZN in about 2 weeks' time. We will engage them and everybody else, and whatever comes out of that will be considered for our report. But in terms of the workings or the operations of the Ingonyama Trust, I think that's for another committee to discuss. Ours is to answer the question, should Section 25 be amended, and if so, how?
Are you going to give them special recognition when you engage?
No, we're not. 2 days ago, we were in Middelburg, and we had a whole delegation from the traditional leadership in Middelburg. Like everybody else, they were afforded an opportunity to give their input. They were listened to. They listened to other inputs. And their input is no different to the input from a person that comes from a child-headed household or from a woman that is feeling marginalized by traditional leaders. All inputs are going to carry equal weight.
One of the concerns we got was that the process was in disarray. Obviously, it depends who you speak to. Didn't start on time, no proper timeframes or venues and information detail about the events given, and people didn't know where to go. Is that true?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked that question. It's not true. Let me say to you and to all South Africans, it is not true. Long before we left Parliament, we had a website set up with all the venues, all the dates, and everything else. And the people who are pushing this line of disarray is Agri-Forum. Now, Agri-Forum's argument is that we're having it during the day. Their members aren't able to participate.
They did raise that there's no people are working that time.
Let me rebut that. If we had it after hours, the vast majority of people who have attended these hearings, who are workers, who are people that are farm laborers would themselves not been able to attend because there's no transport at night. So I can't deprive that voice to mollycoddle AfriForum. Secondly, AfriForum submitted more than 51,000 written submissions. Mm-hmm. Those people in the informal settlements don't have access to internet, and it's their voices that must also be heard. So I don't take the arguments of AfriForum seriously, and I think that they must desist from trying to create the impression that there's chaos in these things. There is no chaos. Let's
just take this time to have more viewer participation. The number is 081-732-8421, and now we have Chris from Pietermaritzburg, who will probably be having a chance to take part next week. Let's listen to their contribution.
Thanks. I think we must firstly commend Parliament for a consultative process on a very emotive issue. But secondly, I think we must also warn that a lot of people who are problematizing Ingonyama Trust have not even read it, because Section 7 of the Ingonyama Trust said any national program on land restitution, the Ingonyama Trust shall abide by it. The only requirement is that there must be consultation with the King, which I think Parliament already has it in that. But lastly, I'm not sure what are the views of Mr. Smith on people who are using this consultation process, firstly to sort divisions, either on race as well as tribal lines, and what should be what is Parliament advising people of in terms of how do we use this consultation to unite the nation towards a united program?
Well, thank you for that, and we'll give Mr. Smith an opportunity to respond. But staying with Ingonyama Trust, the ANC's Fikile Mbalula had this to say.
Comrade Motlanthe expressed the view in the Land Summit where he was asked to present his own perspective on the question of land reform, in particular, the position they formulated on the question of Ingonyama Trust. There is no view of the ANC that says we support the high panel. There is no such. The ANC will engage with the King. So everybody must disabuse themselves about the fact that the ANC is anti-Zulu King and it wants to annex or do anything in relation to this question based on the recommendation of the Motlanthe high level panel.
Also encouraged you to call in, and I believe we have someone on the line right now. But before we move to them, let's just quickly give you an opportunity to respond to that person who asked, what about the people who are abusing this process?
You know, ours is twofold. One, when we officiate over these hearings, we want to make sure that all voices are heard, so that in that way nobody feels that his voice or her voice was not heard. And hopefully by doing that, people will understand that tolerance is important. Secondly, in terms of the divisions, we had warned that this is a very emotive subject, that we need to do it soberly, we need to do it without raising any unnecessary expectations or dampening any expectations. And ours can only be to request South Africans who come to these hearings to do so in a mature and in a sober manner, and we from Parliament will do the same.
You're watching the agenda and the Constitutional Review Committee on Land in about 2 weeks into their operations, and we're just trying to get a sense of where they're going. Let's get one of those lines. Kekana from Zebediela is on the line. Kekana, very good morning to you. What are your thoughts on this discussion?
Yes, thank you, Deborah. My thought is, I'm thinking people should get the land where it's needed. Where we see people are suffering, they need that land. But we can't just allocate any land to anybody, because the land that they will need for providing us with food, and then we need land that we can keep it for us, for the animals, or for the environment as well. So my question is, the government, they must just look whether people are suffering of need of that land, so they must just get it. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much for your contribution. The issue of food security keeps coming up over and over and over again. What kind of uses can we think of in terms, if you were to make up a list of the uses of land, if people were to then get a hold of land?
Let me not talk about my views. Let me tell you what South Africans are saying where we went to. Many of them are saying, we work the land. We're the one that do the plowing. We're the one that do the harvesting. So if we are given a piece of land as farm laborers or farm tenants, there will be no threat to food security. It's a myth to say that only white farmers will secure food security. This is what the people are saying. And therefore, I think that if there are people that are on the farms currently, it will be in the interest of all of us to be able to share that land. After all, this is the exercise. South Africa must share the land between black and white and everybody.
So in the end, after looking at all the historical implications, there's also a need to look at practical implications in the allocation of land.
Absolutely. And I think that, one, we must ensure that there's stability at the end of this exercise. Whatever it may be, the country must be more stable than it is today. And it can only be stable if the majority of South Africans feel they have a stake in this country. And therefore, farmers, farm laborers must find a mechanism where they could share, work together, coexist. Yeah. And I'm talking from an agricultural point of view. Clearly from a residential point of view, where people need housing, they must be able to be given housing as opposed to land lying idle. We're not talking here about private land only. The state owns lots of lands. All the state-owned entities that have land that is not being used. Yeah. Military has land that's not being used. Councils have land that's not being used. So it's not only about grabbing land from private owners, but it's about utilizing land that is lying idle, even from state-owned entities. So we must use all land for the use of residential resettlement and for the use of land reform in terms of agricultural productivity.
I'm really encouraged by our viewers. We're getting calls from all over the country. And now we have George from Polokwane, where you've been already. Yeah. George, what is your contribution to this conversation?
Yes, my question is, much as we have got, like, those who land will be expropriated from, say it's say 10% of the population, if not 5%. But there's a larger pool who is desperate for land. How are we going to address it? Is it going to lead to an uproar where people are going to fight into a war, where people are going to fight for land? And obviously, it has automatic ramifications on food security. Because there's a number of people who are desperate for land. Some just want it for the sake of it, like your RDP houses, which have been rented to foreign nationals. Don't you think this is going to be abuse just for self-serving? While people will have land and eventually not use it for anything but lease it to foreign nationals, like we already have RDP houses. But then at the same time, we say from the number that they're going to take land from, it's quite minimal against those who are desperate for land. How are we going to reconcile the two?
Well, if you had watched the show just before the conversation, the president already answered that question, although he was responding to the call by the King of Amazulu, King Goodwill Zwelithini, saying that there is no need to fight over the land. But I'll give you an opportunity to respond to George.
Let me respond to George in this fashion. We must separate our exercise from the actual usage of the land after it has been expropriated. Ours is to answer the question, should the Constitution be amended? If indeed the Constitution is amended, the exercise of expropriation, who, how, when and why, will be an exercise done through legislation. So we're not answering that question. Ours is, if there must be a change in the Constitution, we will change it, and then it will go to another body who will actually put into place legislation that will answer the question that George is asking. Who will get the land? What will it be used for? What are the criteria for expropriation? And so on. That is not our exercise.
Another element that George brought up, and I'm just curious to find out if this came out in the different interactions and the deliberations. Did you find there were any xenophobic undertones in the conversations?
I'm going to be honest with you, because this is not a popularity show. Yes, there were.
Yeah.
There were people who said...
Disturbing.
Yes, there were people who said, we are natives of South Africa. We don't have land. People coming in from other parts of the country, other parts of the world, they open up spaza shops, they get business license for mining and so on, and yet we don't have it. So yes, I know the people's anxiety. It borders on xenophobia, but I don't think it was deliberate xenophobia. But of course they are saying, why should we, as inhabitants of this country, always come second, whereas other people from outside get licenses a bit quicker than we get. They get places where they open up their spaza shops and so on. So yes, there is that element as well, and it's disturbing.
Let's just get a final WhatsApp note and hear what they have to say.
Hello, my question is that the Department of Road and Traffic Works already has the land, and they have been having the land for a very long time. But for instance, here in Potchefstroom, they have never ever issued land to anyone. So I just want to understand, before we even jump to that issue of expropriation of land, how are we currently going to deal with the situation where the Department of Public Works doesn't give land to the people so that they can use it for various business purposes?
Yeah, those are the low-hanging fruits, Desiree, that we've been agitating for. State-owned land, land that is lying idle. There's nothing that stops government from using that land, expropriating it from sister departments to use it for whatever the people would need it for, whether it be agricultural or for residential. Nothing has stopped the departments from doing that, including the Department of Education. It has the powers currently to expropriate land for building of schools. I just think that government needs to understand the powers they have and to implement it, and half of the problems that we have might be addressed.
Mr. Smith, in your personal experience, you've worked in Parliament and many motions have been passed in Parliament. When last did you have a motion that was set to change the course of the country, such as this one?
I've never personally had anything. It's unprecedented, both in the number of written submissions, both in the amount of people that come out, as well as the, if you could call it, the intensity of the debate. People are angry out there. They feel impatient. Other people are very anxious because they feel that their whole livelihoods will be taken away. It's unprecedented. I think, and the President said it some time ago, that outside of the writing of the Constitution, this is probably the biggest other story that South Africa has seen.
Yeah. The Parliament is supposed to be the Parliament of the people. And I think sometimes parliamentarians, the honorable ones, would take that for granted, because they, outside of their constituencies, they hardly ever interact with the nation. How has this been for your colleagues?
Well, again, you know, when this exercise was embarked upon, Parliament was very clear that it can't be 400 people sitting in Cape Town that will decide the future for 55 million people. And they instructed us to go and to consult broadly and consult honestly. And I think that this consultation has been very healthy. It should be the route to go, because after all, as the ANC, we've always said the people shall govern. And therefore the voices of the people must be what informs what we do in Cape Town. It's been unprecedented, and it's been hard work, but I think it's the way to go.
What were the highlights for you?
The highlights for me were listening to the people, being able to engage with various people from different angles. Those were the highlights for me. And also, I must admit, the tolerance that people had for each other. They would swear and shout and scream.
There were times when we looked at the Northern Cape visuals and thought, okay, somebody needs to go in and stop this.
But when we said to people that if you disrupt this process, we lose everything, people quickly sobered up and began to cooperate with us. So that is a highlight, that people understand the importance of it. And of course, I wouldn't want to do this again in my life. It's been a very, very hard 2 weeks.
Really?
It's been terrible 2 weeks.
One would think that it's really been a added value to
No, it has added value to
content.
the individuals.
Yeah.
I think it has added value to Parliament, but on a personal note, I could do other things, I think,
Yeah.
with those 2 weeks. Yeah.
So now you've gone through these 2 weeks and you still have to go to KZN. How many more provinces are you going to?
Well, we've got 4 more provinces.
Yeah.
We've broken the committee into 2. Those that are doing the coastal have got to go to KZN and the Eastern Cape. And those of us that are doing the inland have to go to the Northwest. Next stop is Northwest, and after that we do Gauteng. And then jointly we will go and do the Western Cape as the last, as a joint committee. So there's probably about 3 more road shows per province that each group will have to do.
Did you find that the different parts of the country have different concerns and different needs for what they want to use land for or why they want land?
Absolutely. You go to Limpopo, for instance. There they're saying, but Mahubas Kloof and those places are very fertile. Give us the land we want to plant. Then you go to Mpumalanga, where we were. People are saying, but we aren't able to bury our loved ones.
Yeah.
Where must we bury our loved ones? Give us land to bury our loved ones. Or where our loved ones have been buried has now been built upon. And it is an affront to our culture. So people need land for different things. And I think this is what's going to happen throughout our visits.
In an area such as the Northern Cape, which is considered the largest area in terms of space in the country, but the land is not tenable. You can't use it much for production.
I don't know what went on there because I was not there. But yes, I would imagine that government have to be creative. There's land hunger all over. And I think every square centimeter of land that's there should be put into productive use as opposed to lying idly.
One of the biggest challenges in South Africa is the issue of cohesion, racial cohesion. Did you find that this process helped or it deteriorated that conversation?
I'm hoping that it helped the conversation. People, unfortunately, were divided along racial lines. But I think when we understand where everybody else comes from, it helps me to appreciate his concerns or his anxieties. And at the end of the day, I think South Africa will be better for this exercise. Both black and white will understand we have to share this country if we want to prosper.
We also went in with the perception that white people, especially farmers, want to hold on to the land. But there's also that conversation that's gaining traction that farmers are actually willing to share their land. What is your sense of that conversation?
I've personally had at least 2 farmers come to us and say to us, we're currently doing that. One in Limpopo, I think, and another one, I'm sure, in Mpumalanga, was saying we are currently doing that. Given the space, given the support from government, we'd be able to do that. But of course, other people are saying it needs to be speeded up. So where people are doing it, we must give them the support. Where people are not doing it, we must encourage them to do it. I want to reiterate, the land must be shared between all of us, black and white, if we want stability in this country.
You indicated your pleasure at the content and the robustness of the conversations. Going forward and the people you're going to interact with, what would you like to advise in terms of how they approach the process and how they contribute to it?
I don't want to dictate to people, but I think people, if they focus on our task, should Section 25 be amended to allow the state to expropriate without compensation? And if so, why? And if not, why not? If people focused on that, they can be assured that their voices will find resonance in our recommendations that goes to Parliament. If people focus on, for instance, the fact that their claims have not been settled or that the potholes in the street, they're wasting their time in terms of what will then appear in our recommendations. So if people could focus, we will take their recommendations seriously and try and find a way that those views are reflected in the recommendations that we submit to Parliament. So focus on, should Constitution Section 25 be amended? If so, how? If not, why don't you think it should be amended? And I think you will be doing yourself and South Africa a good service.
Mr. Vincent Smith, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate, we totally understand. We've watched every move and we know it has been a really involved process. So totally understand that you might be totally fatigued, but we appreciate that you made the time to come through. just in wrapping up this conversation, what are your collective thoughts and what you walk away with? I know the process is not complete yet, and how should people be preparing for August when the process goes into its second phase?
Well, people should, one, rest assured that their voices have been heard and will be taken seriously. Secondly, come the end of September, people should look out to see if in fact we took them seriously in our recommendations, because we must be able to defend whatever recommendation we take to Parliament on the basis that this is what was said in Polokwane, this is what was said in the Free State, this is what was said in Gauteng, and we'll have to defend it when we go to Parliament. And I'm sure all the parties that were present in these committee hearings have their own constituencies, and they wouldn't want their constituency's voice to be left out. Yes.
Yeah.
So it's going to be fair. It's going to be difficult to get to it. We would need the wisdom of Solomon, but we're going to try and do our best.
Just give us a little sense of the kind of work that's going to go into what you do when you get back to Parliament in terms of preparing a document to wrap up all the experiences of the different hearings.
Well, currently we've asked somebody to analyze the written submissions for us. So we will get a report that says these are the written submissions.
So
and
the work
these
is
are
being done
sentiments.
parallel?
Yes, there's work being done in Cape Town that we will probably get a report at the end of August. We will then take the work that we've done now, collate it into a report, and amongst each other at a political level argue which ones should be in our recommendations and how should they be in our recommendations. So
and the politicians are not going to hold up the
doors and
process
have a
in
bun
Parliament.
fight. We'll have a bun fight behind closed doors in Cape Town.
Vincent Smith is a member of Parliament, but also the co-chair of the Constitutional Review Committee on Land. Thank you so much for your time once again.
Thank you so much.